Love him or hate him, Jacob Zuma is a brilliant politician. It is highly unlikely that the next president of the Republic will not come from the ANC. We can safely say that John Steenhuisen is not the next president. Is it true that some producers, editors, and journalists have been running their PR companies and PR operations from the newsroom?
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX in this important election week. And today we are so overjoyed to be joined by your favorite guest, in my view, the foremost analyst of South Africa's politics, Gogo Aubrey Matshiqi. Before we get started, remember to help us get to 100,000 subscribers before the 29th of May. We're nearly there. Gogo, thank you so much for joining us. It's always an honor to have you on the platform.
Nkosi.
Togoza Gogo. Well, firstly, to just say how happy we are to have you here. I know that you've been through some challenges health-wise, but it's a great joy that you're able to join us.
I am grateful to be here. Yes, you're right. I had just a second health emergency in the space of 18 months. The most recent one, I didn't think I would be able to talk because after that one, I couldn't talk, I couldn't stand, I couldn't sit, I couldn't walk. But I'm grateful to Kamata, Nabadala. Here I am being able to talk to you. And baby steps, I'm beginning to walk again. So slowly but surely, the recovery is happening.
Well, we couldn't be more happy about that as well. And your voice is so important to the country. And we're so grateful that you decided to join us before this election, because it feels to me like we're entering that moment of the election where rationality has gone out of the window. Everyone is desperate for different reasons, and everyone feels this election so palpably. And reasoned discussion is at a premium. So we're glad to have you.
Well, you're right, the levels of insanity amongst those of my generation and older, I think, have been going up.
Yeah, I can confirm. Yeah.
During the election campaign. And young people will be unhappy to know that it is said that insanity is hereditary. We inherit it from our children.
Yeah. Is that so?
Yes.
Well, I guess the big story of this election, in one way, is the MK Party and former President Zuma.
Definitely.
And may I just say, our last conversation, which has been watched nearly 500,000 times now, you said that Zuma was gaining momentum. And again, at that time, it seemed like a very outlandish claim, maybe 1%, 2% here, but the idea that Zuma would be a major force, which he has turned into, was still up for debate at that time. How do you assess and analyze former President Zuma and MK's role in this election?
You're right. MK, I think, is the biggest story of this election. Love him or hate him, Jacob Zuma is a brilliant politician. And once again, with what he has done with MK, he has shown how brilliant he is. In fact, when I watched the rally at Orlando Stadium, on several occasions during that rally, I had goosebumps. Because I thought, those who teach politics have been getting a lot of content from Jacob Zuma and MK and what he has done with MK. For me, what is interesting is this. What he has done is to create a formation to which the struggle heritage, which the ANC was the sole custodian of, has now relocated to. So there is a contest about where the struggle heritage or the revolutionary heritage should reside. Is it the ANC or is it in MK? With what he has done and with what he has been doing with the MK, you see some relocation of aspects of that revolutionary tradition or aspects of that struggle heritage, if not completely, but maybe partially, from the ANC to MK. But he does something else that I think is very important. Something else relocates from the ANC to MK. The military wing of the ANC, Mkhonto is now sitting outside the ANC. A big part of what we knew as MK, Umkhonto the military wing of the ANC, is sitting in this new formation that he has formed, MK. So that is quite important in many ways because prior to Polokwane, many of those who were loyal to him were those who were in the intelligence structures of the ANC, underground and in exile, and those who were in Umkhonto Wesizwe. And they were responsible, in the main, in my view, for installing him as president of the ANC in Polokwane, and of course, later as president of the country in 2009. Those people are sitting in MK now and are in part responsible for the strategy of MK. Some may argue that these are people who have not worked in an organization outside the military and may lack political experience in that sense. I dispute that. I think they come into this new formation with a lot of political experience, even if it is not organizational experience. You can do a lot with political experience, and I think they've done a lot if you look at where MK is today. And if you look at the support they've been able to lend strategically to Jacob Zuma as their leader.
What do you think accounts for the MK's success? Because I think a lot of people haven't, and by success, I just mean ability to attract a serious amount of electoral support in a very short period of time. COPE had much longer, even though it was just before the election. The EFF had much longer, but MK has only been in existence for 6 months. Clearly, there was a lot of planning beforehand, in my view, but what do you think actually accounts for this unprecedented rise of a party in 6 months to the level which it's at now?
Well, again, you see the brilliance of Jacob Zuma as a politician and those around him. Because what they've created is a formation with multiple identities. And depending on what they want to achieve, they will foreground a particular dimension of that multiple identity or complex identity. For instance, let me go back to the rally to make this point. So look at the optics. You have men in military uniform marching. And then you have Amabuto doing the formations of Amabuto. So what they do at that rally is to invoke Zulu nationalism or the pride of being Zulu. But if you listen to the speech, what Jacob Zuma does is to take us back to Morogoro. Remember, one of the things the ANC comes out saying after the Morogoro conference in 1969 is that when it comes to the prosecution of the liberation struggle is about the liberation of Black people in general and Africans in particular. In other words, the prosecution of the liberation struggle is primarily about the liberation of the African. And when you listen to Jacob Zuma's speech at the rally, he's taking us back there. The centrality of the African and the centrality of the African in the liberation project. I think when you combine that with the Zulu nationalist impulse, you have a very potent weapon. And you have a very potent instrument through which you can attract support. So what he does, he combines the modern and the traditional in his political strategy. So you have him organizing MK as a modern political formation, but also as a military formation, but also as a traditional formation to the extent that you have hints of Zulu tradition and Zulu nationalism in how they organize and in the optics they deploy. But then he also relies on something else. He relies on the weaknesses and failures of the ANC and he projects them in a particular way. So he positions MK as the ideological other, not just the political other, but the ideological other of the ANC. But as far as liberation movements go, he positions MK as the authentic liberation movement. So the ANC is not the authentic liberation movement. So to the extent that the historical mission of the ANC is incomplete, that historical mission will be completed by MK, which he positions as the authentic alternative to the African National Congress as a liberation movement. But look at what he does also. How he uses language. His reliance on the Zulu language is attractive not only to those who speak Zulu, but to anyone who speaks an African language, because that lends another level of authenticity to what MK is. So you can also add another dimension to that, the class dimension. That he positions MK as an organization of the poor, and therefore of the working class, the poorest of the poor. So this MK has interesting ideological dimensions in how he deploys it. And overall, of course, he deploys MK as something that exists in contradistinction to the ANC. It is what the ANC is not in terms of what the ANC has become. So I think those are some of the tactics he has deployed to bring MK to where it is today.
What did you make of the Constitutional Court judgment and how MK has responded to that judgment? And what significance do you think it will have in this election and maybe beyond?
Well, remember where I come from. When it came to sentencing Jacob Zuma to 15 months for contempt of court, remember I aligned myself with the minority judgment, not the majority judgment. So I did not agree with the majority judgment in that matter. At the moment, one of the arguments being posited is that the Constitutional Court was not the court that should have heard this matter. given that it is the same court that sentenced him to 15 months in jail. But of course, the counter-argument has been, but this is the court of last instance. And we must accept that it is what it is. You cannot appeal a judgment of the Constitutional Court. Again, I don't agree. I think you need a certain level of wisdom, according to which you say, when it comes to the Constitutional Court as the court of final instance, you can skin the finality cat in different ways. So the question is, when it comes to a moment or moments when the Constitutional Court cannot be the court of last instance, how should you skin the finality cat? And in my view, is that what should be explored in future is what happens in a scenario where the Constitutional Court cannot be the court of last instance or final instance. Is there another way of skinning this cat? My answer would be, at such moments, we should think of other ways of skinning the finality cat. We have time now to think about the judiciary in general, to think about the Constitutional Court in particular, and therefore to think about possible scenarios in future, because this campaign or this election has delivered scenarios we did not anticipate. So we must do the work of trying to anticipate what scenarios may eventuate in future, and therefore do a bit more thinking and deeper thinking about our jurisprudence and where it should go.
There were some predictions that if the court ruled against Zuma, which it subsequently did, the MK Party would potentially incite violence or even activate violence. We haven't seen that. What do you make of that, and what do you make of their response to the judgment?
Well, look, I'm not surprised they accepted the judgment, even albeit grudgingly, because they won two big battles against the ANC. These were battles about whether it has stolen the ANC's identity, which could also be a battle about the authenticity of MK. Now, the two big battles they won about the trademark and the name itself, to some extent, constitute a victory as far as which one is authentic. So the ANC goes to court to defend its authenticity. They lose. In my view, they lose more than a court battle. They lose aspects of their identity to MK. And therefore they lose the battle for authenticity. Having won such a big battle, I think MK thought to be injudicious in how they respond. Their lack of wisdom would detract from the battle, big battle they've already won against the ANC.
In terms of election scenarios and the prospect that things could go south, what likelihood do you think there is for something to go south in this election? And what kind of scenarios, however likely, do you think would be those scenarios where things could go south?
Well, let me go back to our earlier discussion about MK and what it has become. over the past 5 months. So, as I said, Jacob Zuma takes the military wing of the ANC, Umkhonto weSizwe, outside the ANCs and locates it outside the ANC in this new party, Umkhonto weSizwe Party, MK Party. Now, in one of his pronouncements, Gwede Mantashe says something interesting. And the question is whether what he says is far-fetched or not. He says, when you look at what Jacob Zuma has done, this is reminiscent of how rebel movements elsewhere in the continent have emerged. In the worst case scenario, he is right. And the question is whether, in part, this is a question you may be asking, in the worst case scenario, do we have a situation where this political party, MK Party, given its roots, having succeeded in relocating Umkhonto weSizwe, the military wing of the ANC, from the ANC to a position outside the MK, outside the ANC, in MK. Having succeeded in doing that, can it become a rebel movement like Renamo or UNITA? If you believe Gwede Mantashe, you will say, yes, it can. In my own view, I rely on what I believe will be the wisdom of those inside MK. The wisdom, that wisdom should remind them that the historical mission of the liberation struggle is incomplete. They have decided to form MK ostensibly to save the ANC, to rescue the ANC. And one of the ways they can do this is to complete the historical mission of the liberation movement or of the liberation struggle, to the extent that they argue that the ANC has failed in this respect. Now, this they cannot achieve. Total liberation cannot happen, not under their leadership, if they are imprudent in the strategies and tactics they adopt. They must also take the long view. If they are short-termist in their approach, are obsessed with easy victories and short-term victories, they can take the injudicious tactical option of turning this political party, yes, into a rebel movement or something like that. But as I say, I rely, maybe too optimistically, on what I believe is the existence of many people inside MK who are wise enough to know what is at stake. What is at stake is the total liberation of those who are oppressed, the completion of the liberation struggle, and the party or movement that can do that is only a party that is equal to the task. It will not be equal to the task if it is populist and is hungry for short-termist and easy victories. Because if there is a hunger for short-termist populism and easy victories, yes, it can mutate into the kind of movement that can visit upon the country untold instability and misery. So I hope Gwede Mantashe is wrong, and I hope I'm right in thinking there's enough wisdom in MK to avoid that path.
Well, one of the interesting things in this election, and I think after this, we'll come on to where we see the lay of the land before the results tell us exactly where things are. My sense is that the MK is going to be very happy with the outcome of this election. And so to the extent that they could take things south, which is a whole debate in and of itself, I don't think they are going to be the ones who have the incentive to do that. If anything, although I could be wrong, I think the ANC is going to be the party that's the most disappointed after this election. So it seems strange to me that people are worried about what MK is going to do, when in my view, out of every party in South Africa, MK will probably be the happiest come the 30th of May. But I could be wrong.
Well, remember what JZ does before Pulukan. He comes across as one who's very comfortable in his Zulu skin. And those of us who are middle class and who are obsessed with our liberal democratic aesthetic see him as a barbarian who's going to plunge the country into chaos and all of that. I think those impulses are still with us. That impulse has now relocated to how we look at MK. So I think our middle class impulses and prejudices make us see MK and Jacob Zuma as the barbarians at the gate who are going to plunge South Africa into a state of chaos and mayhem. And therefore, if there's any party that may cause instability after this election, if it does not get what it desired, is MK. Well, I've been asking two questions. First question, if the ANC performs far below where it wanted to be, will all components of the ANC accept the result? I've also been asking, if MK does not win the level of support it thought it would, do all these components accept the result? If you look at how the campaign is proceeded, we've been very wrong about KZN. There's been the assumption that there'll be violence within that province.
Absolutely.
Between MK and the ANC and Inkatha and MK, or between MK and MK. That has not materialized in any serious sense.
Absolutely.
And I suspect that after this election, whatever unhappiness MK may feel about the result, if they have cause to be unhappy about the result, will not translate into mayhem, chaos, and instability in KwaZulu-Natal. I don't think so.
I agree. And it's interesting how, in some ways, the noise level has risen in this election. And I suspect is set to rise after this election. But a lot of what we have become accustomed to institutionally has really remained stable.
Exactly.
The Concord ruling for me was a demonstration of that, to the extent that you had an incredibly controversial case involving MK. The court actually rules against them in an adverse way. And what happens is that the country, MK included, finds a way of negotiating around that and ultimately accepting it begrudgingly. And things remain as they were. So the hysterical analysis is often misplaced. I think we either have, which I have mentioned before, we have two settings as a country: hysteria and euphoria. And the truth is usually somewhere in between.
Yes. I think the hysteria, to some extent, betrays the prejudices, class and otherwise, of the chattering classes or the so-called thinking classes.
Absolutely.
their prejudices have played a very big role in how they perceive a formation like MK and how to respond to certain situations. So if anything, to some extent actually, there's a need to decolonize the minds of those who sit in the chartering classes, or even the minds of the middle class, in the sense that the middle class, as I said, has this prejudice, born out of his obsession with the liberal democratic aesthetic, that a formation like MK, that seems to be a deviant political force, and Jacob Zuma, who seems to be a deviant political force himself, constitute such a threat that the threat should be regarded as existential to the extent that it is a threat to civilization as we understand
As we
it.
know it, yeah.
Yeah.
Gogo, we should come on to the ANC as well, or at least wider questions of the election. And as you know, I have a bet with
Yes.
Oratile, my producer. If the ANC falls below 50, I keep my beard. If it remains above 50, he keeps his. Whose beard is in danger here, in your
Well,
view?
I'll give you an analyst answer.
Should I go to the barber now or?
It is possible you are going to keep your beard.
Mm.
On the other hand, it is possible Oratile will keep his beard.
Yeah,
let,
yeah.
let me put it this way.
Mm.
Until very recently,
Mm.
my baseline scenario has been that not a single political party will win an outright majority, including the ANC.
Okay.
In fact, my baseline scenario for the ANC has been that it will garner between 45 and 48%.
Okay. Okay.
We've been looking at some tracking polls, and every day the ANC has been tracking upwards. I am no longer completely convinced that the ANC will fall below 50%. I look at certain things like, if you look at our election outcomes since 2009, the ANC has been losing on average 4%. And if that trend holds, then the ANC will fall from the 57% it got in 2019 to about 52, 53. That may be, if that is an overly optimistic scenario, they may just cross by a hairline margin the 50% threshold. So that's where I am now. But, because there's always a but, if you look at how the ANC has run its campaign, it peaked over the last 3 or 4 weeks. If it has peaked too late, I think it will fall below 50%. If it has peaked in time, it will just cross the 50% threshold.
One of the things that's been interesting is, and we alluded to this in our previous conversation, is former President Thabo Mbeki and his reassertion as an ANC campaigner and leader. And when you look at the uptick in the polls, it may be correlation or causation, but when he arrived on the campaign trail, the ANC campaign seemed to get a new momentum. And we saw that uptick in the polls soon afterwards. He has since receded somewhat from the campaign, perhaps over health reasons or other reasons. I don't actually know. But what do you make of Mbeki formally campaigning for the ANC again for the first time, I think since he was campaigning as president?
Well, the ANC was not going to make a mistake that was made by Al Gore. Al Gore refused to use Bill Clinton and rely on his popularity to aid his campaign. I think there was an element of hubris there, which backfired badly. And as you know, Al Gore lost that presidential contest. So the ANC was not going to make that mistake. It was going to rely on the popularity of Thabo Mbeki. Now remember that it relies on something else when it comes to Thabo Mbeki. The fact that many look at Thabo Mbeki in contradistinction to Jacob Zuma. And therefore, Jacob Zuma is the other, not the better other, the worse other, and therefore Thabo Mbeki is the good other. And therefore, relying on his image, someone who's clean, not tainted by corruption, and all of that. Whether in fact he can completely make that argument is another question altogether. But the perception has held that in contradistinction to Jacob Zuma, he is clean. And so you deploy that if you're the ANC. And as a result, we have interesting battles. You have a battle between Jacob Zuma and Thabo Mbeki. And then you have an interesting battle between Thabo Mbeki and Cyril Ramaphosa.
Absolutely.
So I was not surprised yesterday that the president, on the eve of the election, called a family meeting.
Yeah.
In all probability, if I were an ANC strategist, I would have said to them, look, this is our best card. His approval rating is in the upper 70s. So you deploy your best card just before an election. If you want to be moralistic about it, you may want to argue that the ANC played dirty yesterday by having the president do a family meeting so close to an election and extolling the virtues of the presidency under his guardianship over the past 5 years.
Absolutely. I don't think have we ever seen that before an election before?
No.
Yeah,
and I don't
can't
think
remember.
we're going to see it anytime soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was really taking a very serious liberty by blurring party and state at such a crucial time.
Add to that, he all of a sudden finds his pen and is able to sign all these bills just before an election. So
yeah, absolutely. Not to mention load shedding has also disappeared.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So ANC strategists, for perverse reasons, must be commended for how they played this game. Of course, no self-respecting party will avoid using the advantages of incumbency, which is what happened here.
It also signaled an air of desperation to me. I could be, again, wrong, but for the party so close to the election to say, you know what, we need the president to talk to everyone in the nation, signals to me that internally they knew they needed that. And I wonder what messages they're getting internally that made them take such an extreme step.
Remember, there is a time when their own internal polling was telling them they could go as low as 41%. And therefore, the ANC going below 45% at the time of making these decisions remained a possibility. So to obviate this, you use whatever you have with regard to the advantages of incumbency. Of course, it is a kind of politics that will make many people take a dim view of what has happened during this campaign. But I suspect any other party would have done the same.
So, Gogo, we've spoken about the scenario in which the ANC clings on, and I think we all know what happens there. The ANC, holds on to what it's been
Yeah.
doing, and it's more of the same, or it just falls below 50 and it brings in the IFP or a collection of smaller parties and governs as it usually has.
Mm.
But humor me here, Gogo, even if unlikely. I'm not so sure how unlikely. I think below 45 is a scenario to contend with. But let's consider the worst case scenario for the ANC as well. Number one, it goes below 45 and it can't bring a single party with it. Or the IFP plus even 2 or 3 small parties still won't get it over the line. Number two, it loses Gauteng, which I think is probably a certainty at this stage. But number three, it loses KZN. And I'm going to say, if we're talking about the worst case scenario, number four, it possibly loses another province, whether the Northern Cape, Free State, or the Northwest, possibly. I don't know what MK is going to do in Mpumalanga, but I think that would be a bridge too far. In which case, we would then sit with an ANC that's lost its national majority, is no longer the dominant party in 4 provinces. And that would be quite, what do you think happens in that scenario?
Well, I've been saying that in a scenario where the ANC falls below 45%, one of the questions that will arise is whether Cyril Ramaphosa can survive.
Yeah.
Fortunately for him, the next conference of the ANC is only in 2022.
27,
2027. The last one was in 2022. 2027, which might give him enough time to recover, or might give his enemies inside the ANC enough time to organize a rebellion against him, so that if he intends to run for another term as ANC president, he is displaced. Alternatively, it might give his enemies enough time to make sure he is removed before that conference. Or they split a strategy into 2. It becomes a strategy about whether you remove him as ANC president or you remove him as head of state. So if they fall below, they fall below 45%, I think there may be an attempt to punish him by removing him as head of state. But whatever happens, even if they go above 50%, even if they win 50% plus, he's going to be named that president anyway. Given that as head of state, the next term is his last term. When it comes to patronage and things like that, what does he have to offer? Let's think of a scenario where the ANC falls below 50%. That means fewer ANC people go to parliament and the legislatures,
Absolutely.
for instance.
Yeah.
And that means competition inside the ANC becomes fierce and may have the effect of compromising internal stability in the ANC. And of course, he might take the primary blame for that. But there are only 2 scenarios that I think are important at the moment. The ANC gets a relative majority, in which case it goes into a coalition arrangement. The question will be with whom?
Yeah.
Or the ANC crosses the 50% threshold and they fight Alice. And they don't have to share the spoils with anyone. In the first scenario, of course, then questions arise about MK and the EFF.
Absolutely.
And then the question arises whether John Steenhuisen is right to be fearful of the possibility of a coalition between the ANC, MK, and the EFF. Now, I can tell you now, if we end up with such a scenario, the rand will go to 30 to the dollar. The markets are very nervous about that possibility. But they've been watching polls recently, and they're not as afraid as they would have been a month ago. Because, as I said, some of the tracking polls suggest that the ANC has been ticking up every day. Now, what the markets want is either an ANC government that is an outright win by the ANC or an ANC-DA coalition, because both scenarios will provide them with some level of policy uncertainty, especially when it comes to economic policy. So if the ANC wins an outright majority, the markets may not be happy about that, but will not be unhappy. Because there is policy predictability and the levels of political uncertainty will go down.
Let's come to the ANC MK EFF before we get to a potential ANC DA or other scenario. There's a lot there that could happen. Number one is that does the ANC decide to go with either MK or EFF or both? And if it goes with both, that could be close to a 2/3 majority. I think if the ANC is at like 40, mid-40s, and then the EFF is at 10 and MK is at 15 or something, that takes us there. So the virtue of that is that you've got a very comfortable governing coalition, last seen in the Mbeki administration, with the three combined. Of course, goodness knows what the markets and the media will be doing at that stage. Or the ANC says, I'm going to go with one or the other, which means that it's either the ANC or MK, EFF or MK, which is less hassle to negotiate with one rather than two. But then one of those, whichever one gets left out, in some ways becomes the biggest loser. So I wonder what you think of this scenario and the different permutations within it.
Well, the one thing to remember is that some of the people who will be voting MK are people who wanted to vote ANC.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we must bear in mind also that if you think of the ANC, EFF, and MK as cattle, these cattle come from the same crop. And therefore, in a way, voting for MK or the EFF, in a way, is about voting for a particular version of the ANC. So the negotiations between MK, EFF, and the ANC, if the coalition formation must be which is between the ANC, MK, and the EFF, you're looking at a very tough negotiation because there are certain demands made by the different parties that may be deal breakers. For instance, EFF is insistent that Floyd Shibambo should be the next finance minister. Capital and the markets don't want that. The ANC does not want that. If the ANC wins a relative majority, there is no way they will want to give up the post of finance minister. So that may be a deal breaker to the disadvantage of the EFF.
Yeah.
The EFF also has insisted that if Cyril Ramaphosa is the ANC's presidential candidate, there's no deal. Again, that may be a deal breaker. So the EFF must calculate very carefully the nature of the demands it makes, because if they amount to deal breakers, it will be more to the disadvantage of the ANC I mean, it will be more to the disadvantage of the EFF than the ANC, and may force the ANC to choose between MK and the EFF in a scenario in which the MK has one sizable support. And back to your point about choosing either the EFF or MK, that leads us to another possible scenario. By what device or devices would the ANC want to divide MK and the EFF?
Yeah.
By sweetening the deal either for the EFF or MK against the other. Yeah,
Because really the ANC only needs one.
exactly. Yeah.
What do you think the EFF should be prepared to compromise on and not compromise on if they want to govern before we come to the MK? I'm reminded of the EFF's negotiations with the DA in 2016, where they said Herman Mashaba will never be the mayor of Johannesburg. And, well, history tells us that they compromised on that. So I wonder what they would or should compromise on. If you were to put on your red beret for a second, you've already put on your yellow T-shirt and your MK, and we're going to ask you to put on your blue T-shirt just now. What would you do if you were them?
Well, what all of them must remember, all of them, ANC,
Yeah.
MK,
Yeah.
the EFF, is that there are times when your political desires matter less than what is politically possible. And this is why, of course, we say politics is the art of the possible.
Yeah.
So all of them must not confuse what is possible with what is desirable. So that would be the first advice I give to all of them and to the EFF. The EFF must not confuse what is desirable with what is possible. Strategically, I think if they push the demand of Lord Shibambu becoming the next finance minister too hard, they may lose more than what they will gain in the coalition negotiations. If I were their strategist, I would advise them to be prepared to compromise on that demand and make demands about what should happen elsewhere, for instance, in Gauteng. They may want to play a gambit such as, okay, we give you finance, will you give us the premiership of Gauteng? Something like that. Or something else in Gauteng and elsewhere, where they might find themselves in coalition negotiations with the ANC. But I do suspect that if they insist too hard on the question of Floyd Shibambu taking up the finance portfolio, they will lose more than they will gain.
Yeah. Then there's the question of deputy president as well. They have kind of intimated a Malema deputy presidency. And in fact, they've said, no, well, why not president? So they want Ramaphosa to go and Malema to be deputy. Again, that's going to be a hard sell for the ANC.
Before we come to that, I think I've argued in a previous conversation that what may happen in this election, and this is what may drive coalition formation, is that the top three may drop slightly. The ANC, the DA, and the EFF may drop slightly. If this happens, of course, it will impact on what the EFF is able to do or is not able to do.
Very true.
Because if the EFF drops slightly from what it garnered in 2019, the question they have to ask thereafter is whether that trend will hold into future elections.
Mm.
If their opponents, such as the ANC, take the view that in their reading, that trend will hold into future elections, then the negotiations will not only be about 2024. The negotiators will be looking at 2029 and what is likely to happen in 2029. If the ANC thinks the EFF will continue to drop after this election, they will take a harder stance on issues when it comes to coalition formation with the EFF.
Yeah. The question about MK, a similar question, is what does MK want and what does the ANC want? And could they find each other somewhere in the middle there? I wonder what you think that looks like.
Well, what I think MK does not want is Cyril Ramaphosa as president.
Like the EFF.
In a scenario where the ANC wins either a relative or absolute majority, of course,
Yeah.
they're not going to get that.
Yeah.
So the next thing is, again, similarly to what I've argued with the EFF, what do they want? What can they win at national level? They may demand some ministerial posts. Of course, there are certain posts the ANC will not give up, such as finance and foreign affairs. So they may win some battles when it comes to other ministerial posts. I suspect MK in KwaZulu-Natal and nationally, if they become part of a coalition arrangement, in both cases, they will want to be part of cabinet and therefore to be an important part in government. But the idea that Cyril Ramaphosa will not be president is not a starter. Is a non-starter. Let me put it that way. Outside the national sphere, look, the question may be not only what does MK want, what can MK give in KZN to the ANC if they perform as well as some of us think they will in KZN?
Even maybe being the biggest party.
Yes. So if they're the biggest party in KZN, the question will be, what does the ANC want? And what can MK give in KZN, which will influence negotiations at national level. So if MK wins KZN, that will have implications for the content of negotiations at national level.
They could also govern KZN, I guess, if that's the case, or be the
yeah. Because even if they win KZN, for the sake of extracting certain compromises from the ANC, they may decide to be inclusive when it comes to the sharing of spoils in KZN.
It's interesting. The DA ANC situation is the other option in the worst case for the ANC, where it can't, it doesn't get 50 or it can't get smaller parties together. How do we make sense of that possibility? And similarly, if you're the DA, what are you thinking? What kind of concessions are you going to try and extract if the ANC says, let's think seriously about this national coalition?
Well, Capital don't mind an ANC victory because, as I said, that would deliver to them policy predictability and less policy uncertainty. But they would love a DA victory, which is not going to happen. The next thing they would love would be an ANC-DA coalition, because to some extent, the DA and the ANC, when it comes to economic policy, are two sides of the same coin. So Capital would have no problem with the DA-ANC coalition.
I just realized that might also be nearly 2/3 as well. If the DA is at 20 and the ANC is at 45 or something.
Exactly. But the DA will want to extract certain concessions such as a retreat from NHI,
Mm.
some kind of retreat from NHI.
Mm.
They might want to extract concessions as far as the size of the state is concerned. They may want a smaller state.
Mm.
They may also want to extract concessions with regard to the state be a bit more friendly towards the markets and towards business. But when it comes to foreign policy,
Yeah.
it will be very difficult for the ANC
Mm.
and the DA to find one another.
Yeah.
But when it comes to economic policy, I don't think that will be too difficult.
Mm.
As I said, when it comes to economic policy, the DA and the ANC are two sides of the same coin.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's sure. It's going to be so interesting if we do get to that scenario of the ANC below 45. I think maybe it's a bit unlikely, but some polls have suggested it could happen. One of the things I wonder is no matter what coalition is formed in this scenario, how much of it is going to be political change versus policy change? And I'm not so sure that as radical as MK and EFF are in their rhetoric, that when it comes to governing, they will govern as radically as they campaign. Well, I mean, we've already seen what former President Zuma looks like when he governs, because he's actually done it.
Yes.
And it was a very moderate platform, in my view, despite what some have suggested. EFF, we're yet to see. But again, I think we've seen moderation in their rhetoric, even in the campaign to some extent. Similarly, the DA won't really be able to extract massive policy concessions. Yes, maybe a bit on NHI here and a bit on affirmative action there, which I think will get major backlash and they'll probably have to retreat from that because. So my lingering question is this an election of symbolic change or is it one of actual change? And I'm not so sure about the latter.
Well, what this election may deliver, if the ANC falls below 50, is what democratic theorists call democratic consolidation. And by that, they mean that democracy is consolidated when you have alternation of power between parties, which is a very conservative way of looking at democracy in my view. Because we must ask, what is it that is being consolidated when it comes to democratic consolidation? Some of the things that will be consolidated are class and other interests, which means there are certain things then in this narrow understanding of democratic consolidations which become immutable. That's not what you want for a democracy. But I think the current state of the economy will play a big part in determining what is possible and what positions the different parties take. For instance, it is my view that whatever the outcome of this election, South Africa remains a neo-apartheid state. In other words, some of the features of apartheid colonialism will remain intact, irrespective of who wins in this election, irrespective of what coalition arrangement you end up with. You still end up with a neo-apartheid state. And therefore, the idea that this election is going to deliver fundamental change is false, in my view. And that is why my worry is that if I'm right, that we remain a neo-apartheid state and certain class interests remain intact, and the role of capital as currently configured remains more or less intact. Voters are going to be disappointed. They will feel they sold a dummy in the 2024 elections, as the middle class becomes a precariat class. As the lot of the working class and the poor becomes worse, you then hit possibly a year, 2 years or more after the election, a point of social, political, and economic instability because people literally, in some cases, are going hungry.
Yeah, it's a very worrying prospect. And of course, the instability of coalition politics at the national level is going to feel very different to one city here or one city there.
Exactly.
And in many ways, what we talk about is which government will happen after the election. The fact of the matter is that government could be very unstable and could actually fall quite soon after, and we could we could have another government after that.
Or the next general election may come sooner than 2029 as a result.
So there are some interesting things that I wanted to ask you about in terms of what happens after the election. Because what we know from the Constitution is that the president, not the cabinet, which the president chooses, but the president has to be elected 14 days
Soon.
After the election. So we're gonna have a very interesting 2 weeks before June 16th.
Yes, it is highly unlikely that Ramaphosa is not the next president of the Republic. Even if he is not, it is highly unlikely that the next president of the Republic will not come from the ANC. We would need some kind of calamity from the standpoint of the ANC for Ramaphosa not to be the next president. We can safely say that John Steenhuisen is not the next president. I'm not even sure that at the next Federal Congress of the DA, he emerges as the leader of the party.
So actually all the three leaders emerge from this weakened to some extent. Ramaphosa probably not weakened, in your view, to the point where he's actually on his way out.
Yeah.
But if we look at Steenhuisen, he came to power with Mmusi Maimane dropping electorally.
Yes.
And the argument was you didn't increase enough, so therefore you must go.
Yes.
Now he could be hoist by his own petard in the sense that if the DA doesn't grow this time, then the fingers are going to be pointing back at Steenhuisen himself. So what we could see after this is also a weakened John Steenhuisen, unless the DA obviously gets above 24% or so, something.
Well, the best case scenario for Steenhuisen is to more or less stay around what they garnered in the 2019 elections. Anything below that, I think, would be a disaster for them. You know, so you're right in saying anything below 24% would be a disaster.
And Julius Malema, because the EFF has constantly been on this growth trajectory, and suddenly the MK Party threatens that if the polls are to be believed, the EFF looks like it's going to stay around 10, 11. If that happens, what do you think that means for Julius Malema?
Well, he remains very strong. There are two leaders, if you look at the top three, who remain very strong. It's Malema and Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa has succeeded in ensuring that he neutralizes his opponents. His fiercest opponents are now outside the ANC. He has achieved, if not total control, almost total control over the ANC. So in a way, I might even be wrong about him being in danger if the ANC falls below 45%. When I look at the level of control he has over the ANC. I think Malema is so strong. I can't think of anyone in the party who might want to lead a rebellion against him. So even if they drop 2 or 3 points, so even if they go to 8%, I think it would remain secure.
Mm.
And the question is whether between now and 2029, is there an individual or a group of individuals within the party that can mobilize a rebellion against him for their next Congress? In my view, in the short term, and I'm talking here about the next 5 years, that's highly unlikely.
Any of the new entrants in this election that you want to mention? We've got Horizon Mzansi, we've got Bosa. I guess Action SA is new to the national scene. Any of them that you think have a bearing on the outcome?
Well, I think the country has spent a lot of time talking about Rising Mzansi. So there are certain things that have worried me about the media this time. Prior to the 2009 election, the media overcovered the Congress of the People. And look at where they are now. Prior to the 2014 general election, the media undercovered the EFF. I think in this election, the media has overcovered Rise Mzansi and may have slightly undercovered MK. MK might do much better than we have assumed, despite the fact that the media has slightly undercovered them, in my view. The idea on the part of some who sit in the ANC that the media has overcovered MK relative to its size, I think is false. I think MK could have been covered more than it has been. But there are tendencies I'm worried about in the media. I will be indirect in stating them.
Don't worry, now that I've left the mainstream media, you're at liberty to say whatever you like.
Of course, I'm still worried about the fact that some sections of the media remain embedded with particular political interests.
Absolutely.
But I'm worried about something else, and I will not state it directly. I'll state it in the form of questions. And this applies to both the public broadcaster and commercial media, particularly the electronic media. I think the questions we must ask and the media houses must ask themselves are the following. Is it true that some producers, editors, and journalists have been running their PR companies and PR operations from the newsroom? They must ask themselves that question. And if there's any hint that this question has a basis, do the necessary investigation. Is it true that payola has migrated from music to current affairs and news? What we mean by payola is that when it comes to music radio stations, record companies and musicians are sometimes forced to pay to have their music played and to pay for high rotation of that music. Has that tendency of payola migrated to news and current affairs? And the question I'm asking is this: are newsmakers asked for money? Have newsmakers been offering payments for interviews? And if there's any hint that this question has a basis, the necessary investigations must happen.
Indeed. Gogo, as we close, anything else you'd like to say to the viewers and the nation about this election, and any final thoughts about the important few days ahead?
It's a request that they must go out in numbers. Go out in numbers. Some of those who say this may be a watershed election may be right. And you don't want to miss out on the opportunity to make history. Because if it does indeed turn out that this is a watershed election, you should be able to say to your children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, I was there. I participated in making history in the 2024 elections. So my request is that go out and vote on Wednesday. If you're a clever black, take all your dogs.
And the new government, whoever it might be and whoever's leading the country at that time, what do you think its priorities should be, and how can it come out of the gates in a way that reassures the nation rather than creates further anxiety?
I think the expectation is that whatever government we end up with must put forward a plan for turning around the performance of our economy. Literally, many South Africans are going hungry because of the anemic state of the economy. Now, we must remember that 50% of households in this country depend on some kind of social grant or another. We must also remember that the face of poverty in this country is the face of a woman. More than 60% of households in this country are headed by women. As Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. So whatever government we get, the first thing is it must attack is the underperformance of our economy. Because as I said, people are literally going hungry. And here I'm also talking about the middle class. There are people who are middle class who are going hungry.
Indeed. Well, Gogo, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation just on the eve of this important election. We're really appreciative of your time and thank you for sharing your insights.
Tamanko, Thokoza.
The only question is, will we bring our dogs on election day or not? But we'll see. I don't have dogs.
There's a more important question. Will you have a beard after this
That
election?
is very. The viewers will just see me when the results are announced. Either I have a beard or not. I'm not saying anything. I'm not going to do a big reveal. You'll just see whether it's there or not. But I must say, maybe you'll have to join us when someone's beard goes, whoever's it is. So
fortunately, I've already taken care of that.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Spread the fire. Remember to help us to get to 100,000 subscribers. Share this with all your people before the election so that they can have these insights before they go and vote. And stay tuned to SMWX. Comment down below and make sure that you share positive comments that we can share with Ugogo as well, and share the love for Ugogo. Ugogo, Nkosi. Nkosi kakhulu.
Thokoza.
Thokoza.
Tamako.
Thokoza. Yeah.